Good morning, Senate Agriculture. It's Wednesday, April 9th. Committee is trying to clean some fills up off the wall to try to narrow our work down. We expect some more work to come back over from the House, and we want to clean up what we have hanging on our wall so that we can be ready for that. It's hard to believe, but we're only talking about days of ending. I know there's a few people in this community that are sad about that, but it is what it is. We're going to try to get out of here. We're going to spend some morning talking Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. They do great work. And, starting off, we're going to have Michelle Monroe, Executive Director, Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. New in her role. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
All right. I'm gonna try my hand at this technology stuff. I can see where we have that. Not that it really matters, but first I just want to say thank you for having me. And I know that you all heard from conservation districts earlier in the session, so I'm just gonna skip over the sort of introduction to who we are and what we do, assuming you all know that. But if you have questions, I'll happily answer that. So I was asked to sort of talk about some of the federal impacts that we're seeing. And basically we've got 4.75 million that is to the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts and to the districts themselves that's at risk. And so the primary impact is the technical assistance, but that's what most of that money is for. But it's also created uncertainty for a $1.2 million project to replace 3 culverts in Lunenburg, Brighton, and Ferdinand, and a fourth $40,000 culvert project on the Upper Missisquoi River in Orleans County. And then we had a project that was training a cohort of AmeriCorps volunteers as conservation planners in Vermont and the U.S. Virgin Islands, training them together. And that's been canceled outright, but that's left the White River Conservation District with owed $200,000 that it had put forward in good faith to pay those AmeriCorps volunteers during their training. And now $200,000 on an organization with a $400,000 annual budget is a lot of money. And then the USDA has frozen funding that pays for the technical assistance, and most of that is aimed at helping farmers apply to NRCS. You know, the conservation planners go out, they assist farmers in determining what's needed on their farms. They help them develop a plan for their farms and assist them in applying for funding to do that work. And both VACD itself and several of the districts do this work with federal funding. And so we have, in addition to the conservation planners, we have money that funds program assistance. The program assistants actually take that project that the conservation planner helped develop, and they take that to the point of being an actual contract for the farmer. So they're a little bit like paralegals. And we have, interestingly enough, we have a GIS. I'll show you that this Chestnut program is one of the programs where the funding has been canceled. And this is a joint New York Vermont project that helps farmers diversify their farms by planting American chestnuts that were then going to be processed into chestnut oil that is competitive with olive oil. It's actually very similar properties. You can use it in all the same ways. So it's a little ironic that they're canceling money for a manufacturing facility that would produce a product to compete with an import. The name of the chestnut is even the American chestnut. But they have canceled this project, and we already have acres and acres of chestnuts planted in Vermont. So that is really unfortunate. And then you can see this is our UAV team, and they also are sort of technical support for NRCS. And so they have actually developed tools that NRCS staff can use in the field that NRCS says has reduced their workload in some cases by weeks. You know, that they've taken something that would take a conservation planner for NRCS 2 weeks to do and made it happen in a matter of minutes. If they can get all this information, they can bring it back to the office. They take it, they translate it onto map, they translate it into this reports. So it's a little troubling that something that's increasing the efficiency of NRCS is at risk because of these funding freezes. Take them back a little bit. I don't want to keep that. So, and we also
So I'm clear. Some are just outright, will not be funded. And
Yeah, can we go back to that first slide?
Yeah.
Where you
some, yeah.
yeah. Absolutely. And, yep, so what's on hold, these are, you can see the things that have been canceled outright is the money for the conservation training, the conservation planner training that
Okay.
White River and Bennington districts were doing. And the Chestnut project has been canceled outright. What's on hold?
And I'm sorry, so when those things are canceled outright, are reasons given or is just nope?
No, what happened with the conservation training is that a lot of that money was coming from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay,
And the administration has sort of declared war on anything funded with the Inflation Reduction Act money and anything having to do with climate change. And so the name of this program was Climate Corps. So they targeted it because it's named Climate Corps and it's got Inflation Reduction Act money paying for it. Even though we were just training conservation planners to do ordinary NRCS work and because we have a dearth of conservation planners across the country. So that was that work. And then, it's the technical assistance money is all frozen right now. So the technical assistance money, we have technical assistance money coming in both directly to districts and through VACD and through the National Association of Conservation Districts and through the American Farmland Trust. And all of that money is frozen and only a small percentage of it is IRA money. It's just frozen while they evaluate things. But the risk is that these are small organizations
Right.
and having money frozen for long periods of time is really putting the financial health of organizations at risk. So right now, the ACD is owed more than $500,000 for work we've already done on behalf of NRCS. So a good chunk of that, and that's part of a $2 million grant that we do that comes to VACD and also to 3 of the districts in the Northeast Kingdom to do conservation planning and other work. So wetlands, the UAV team, the program assistance.
good.
So is that part of the 3.6 million you're
Yeah,
talking about
that's
right
part
now?
of the 3.6
Okay, so
million.
that's on froze.
That's for
And then the 4.75 million, what tells you that that's at risk?
that is the 3.6 million that's on hold, and we don't know what's happening with that. And it's the funding that's been frozen.
Okay, so
cancel that.
out of that 4.75 million, what is that? What's that money doing?
That money is the 2 projects that have been canceled, and then that 3.6 million, that's
So that's the
technical,
total.
that's
Okay.
technical assistance
Okay.
and those culvert projects.
Okay, so everything,
We don't know the
okay, thank you.
future
That
of.
was another 4.75 million.
So those
Yeah,
are just
no.
on hold. They could be eventually
They
canceled,
could. They could be canceled or they could come through. We
but did no timeline of when that may change.
none. And our friends at NRCS, you know, these are key staff for them, especially with all the turmoil that's happening at NRCS and the threatened, you know, they know they're gonna have to be furloughing staff. They don't, you know, the details of how many yet aren't known, but it's not looking pretty. It's the expectation. And so our staff are gonna be even more crucial for them being able to get their work done and get money out the door. We know that we've got more than 8 million, about $10 million coming to Vermont for NRCS funding this year, 8 million in equipment, some more in the CSP program. So that money, they're gonna need help getting that money out the door to farmers because they're not gonna have, their staff is gonna be heavily impacted, we assume, by the cuts. So that's where, but if we have to lay people off because they're not paying us. And I can't pay people when I don't have any money in my bank account to pay them. So that's sort of the situation we're in. It's really putting the conservation districts and the ACP at risk. And being able to help farmers to get this work done and draw down all this draw down that 8 million plus dollars to be able to do practices on farms.
So that other money is limited on what it can be used for, can't be used for personnel that you need. So the 3 million that you're asking for, and we just talked.
Oh, yeah,
I
the
don't
3
even
million.
know.
Yeah, that
The
3 million.
million is.
That's a
it's-
separate thing. Yeah, that's.
But the 3 million you're asking for here, it's mostly to have a full-time employee in all the 14 conservation
Yes,
districts. Is that what I
exactly.
understand correctly?
Yep, a full-time
So that you
employee.
can actually access all of this other money and
Yep.
get it out to the
And-
farmers and other projects.
And that lets us do 2 things. One, it lets us access other money, and we pull down about $9 right now for every dollar in state funding that we get. In some districts, it's more, in some districts, it's a little less, but the average is $9. So that is helpful, and that doesn't include NRCS money. That's money that we're drawing down to do technical assistance and money we're drawing down for water quality
Yeah.
projects primarily. There's some other things that districts do as well. But the base funding also lets us get beyond what's grant funded. Right?
Yeah.
So if we have landowners that need something from the district to help them. They've got an erosion problem, they've got some sort of problem on their lands that's not covered under any of our grants. That base funding lets us help them. And then we also do local projects, and Sarah can talk more about the details of the locally led process, but we do actual outreach to gather public input on what they see as the natural resources priorities in their communities. And that data combined with the fact that we have locally elected boards that run all of the conservation districts, meaning that the districts are really focused on meeting the conservation needs locally. And that doesn't always align with what funding streams are available for grants. So that base funding really lets them get at some of that local work. You know, like I would say Bennington, for example, their top 3 identified priorities based on public input are PFAS remediation, food security, and farm viability. There's no funding to do those things. And so, but with additional base funding, you know, that would let the district manager do more of that work, because now they're involved with like the Fair Food Initiative in Bennington County, but that's basically a volunteer project for Michael because there's no funding to support him doing that. He's the district manager there. I believe you know him.
I met him over the weekend.
Yeah.
He showed me he wanted to show me the incubator farm
Yes.
that they're doing, which I had no idea what this incubator farm could be, but it's incubating farmers.
Yes.
And I hope you can present all of this because it was a sort of an amazing project. It sounded
Yeah.
like this is a moneymaker that's going to help the vets home reduce their costs. And I think you can actually fill in corrections in there too. This is something that I was really,
Yeah.
really surprised by.
Yeah. So
The project. So if it was something where if every district is doing something like this, then it's great to hear something that's, you know, this farm's going to fail if they don't have the money versus if we have this money, we can make, I think he said $28 million is what he was talking about. In terms
yeah,
of
I think it was,
investment.
yeah.
Which
potentially down the line.
involve chestnuts. actually.
Yeah, that's
So,
a Chestnut
yeah.
project down the line. That's what that's like in about 10, you know, they're speculating that would be in about 10 years.
Oh, yeah,
When
yeah,
they've got
yeah,
a fully
would-
developed
Yeah, it would
crops
be
there.
next year.
But bringing in, allowing for diversified income
Yeah.
streams for our farmers. And yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that incubator project because I think it's a great example. So this is
Yeah.
part of the Fair Food Initiative in Bennington County. And it's the Veterans Home has 12 acres of land that they wanted to do something with. So they're leasing it to the district. And the district, because in order to get any loans when you're a beginning farmer, if you didn't grow up on a farm, you've actually got to prove to FSA before they give you any money that you know how to run a farm. And so you have to have a minimum of 3 years of experience. And so this incubator farm is designed to let people get that experience and also to try out farming before they say, yeah, this thing that looks really fun and seems like I'd like it. It is in fact, maybe it's not the right fit for me once I actually try it. So it gives veterans, the goal is to give veterans the opportunity to try it at a variety of different farming options. So they're going to include an orchard, they're going to have some bees, as well as, fruit and veggies. And a lot of any produce excess can go to the veterans farm. And they're doing a marketing piece along with it. So that doesn't just include farmers that are part of this incubator farm. They're bringing in farmers from the region and doing a cooperative marketing, marketing co-op, I should say, to let them sell to stores and institutions as a group, because it's really hard to do that when you're just one farmer. So it sort of gets a little bit at that farm viability piece that people had identified as a priority, and it gets at that food security piece that people in Bennington County have identified as a priority. But it's also, a little stretching what we do, but I think that that's being responsive to the needs and the priorities of the community, because Bennington, you know, just it doesn't look like Franklin County.
Right.
You know, our Franklin County district is doing, you know, nutrient management plans and visiting, you know, 111 farms in a given year. They're going gangbusters on sort of more traditional NRCS water quality work. You know, they're taking down dams to restore fisheries and all kinds of interesting and creative things. I know you all heard from Lauren before, but the two, you know, you're not going to do the same thing in Franklin County that you're going to do in Bennington, because they're different communities, they have different needs, there are different topographies, different watersheds. It's a, you know, so.
So I kind of find this fascinating. Now is the incubation farms, is that just for veterans or is it for anyone?
That's what Michael was saying. He's got two
Yeah.
lined up now. And it's gonna make food that's gonna be given to the veterans home.
Right.
There's a guy at the veterans home that's working with him on it. He used to be a farmer. I was talking to him about connecting corrections to have folks that might be serving sentences, you know, on probation, going and being the farm hands. And he was mentioning a lot more about the chestnuts, how they're two processes, or one in New York, or was going to be
Yeah.
one in New York, and that's in Massachusetts. The only other place is in Italy.
Yeah,
And that's where sort of there was, I guess, money to be made in the chestnuts. Like, a lot of it was over my head, frankly. We're talking about, you know, saving money for the vet's home with the composting, having the chickens eat the compost. And,
yeah,
I don't know what
it's
this high tunnel is you're talking about.
like tunnels are an NRCS practice that we help farmers apply to.
Yeah, I learned a little bit about it, but it was something that seemed to be exactly what we've been talking about this whole session, where younger farmers getting off the ground, and that's what they're doing.
Well, it's not too far of a
Yeah.
reach just for
Yeah.
you two, because we're gonna be in the afternoon committee
Yeah.
as far as institutions, and we're, it's not too hard to tie in some of that into the veterans homes. And when we're looking at
Yeah.
the other project that we're talking about, you guys are very well aware of the initiative that I put forward and all of that, what we're gonna be. There's not too hard of a tie-in to, that's why we wanna work a little bit harder on what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
oh, yeah.
Yes.
So did they try to incorporate private monies as well, or
Yes.
sponsorships
Yes.
from?
They
It sounds like that, you
They
know,
do.
especially if you can show that your 10-year
Yeah.
investment is gonna, I would think,
And for the, and of course, the farmers themselves are making investments in the trees for the chestnut project. And they do have they have at least one corporate sponsor for the incubator farm project, and they're looking to get more and continue to build on that. And they're really in the beginning phases of that project. Both of these projects are in the beginning phase, and we are working, with our congressional delegation, but primarily with the New York delegation, because it's Elise Stefanik's district, and we figure she has more pull with the administration to try and get that project reinstated than the Vermont's delegation is likely to have. So we are working to try and do that. But I'm happy to have Sarah talk about some of the projects up in Orleans County. With that be appropriate, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And
There were a couple slides on there.
oh, you want them? I'll put it back there.
there you go.
Okay. What would you like me to show?
Oh, just the two slides with the farm examples.
Sure.
Yeah, that one there. Yeah.
Okay, hand over the chair.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Morning.
I'm Sarah Denzel. I work for the Orleans County Conservation District. We're housed in Newport. And I'm the district manager, and I've been the district manager since 2015. And so I wanted to just quickly show in our slideshow, so two slides about some farm projects that the districts have worked on. Fortunately, work on lots of different farms. This slide highlights a farm project that the Pulteney Meadowy Conservation District did. I was not intimately involved with that, so I can't tell you a whole lot more than that. And then this farm, this slide highlights a farm in Orleans County that I've worked with for many years. And both of these farms here, the point I want to really share with you is, we have done a lot of conservation work with both of these farms. On the one with Pulteney Meadow, they did a lot of tree plantings in pasture. And then on this one here, we did a significant livestock exclusion project to help them meet the RAPs, and we planted trees along the riparian areas and done lots of different things on that farm. And both of these farms, we have sourced grant funds for all of that work, as well as grant funds to do water quality sampling on these farms to target where the high nutrients are coming from, work with the farm to identify where in that sub watershed could there be a good project, and then take samples after the project is implemented to show statistically significant reductions. So it's a really nice way to service the farm in like a holistic way, to look at the whole land base, but then also help them really own this ubiquitous problem of water quality around, like, these are your numbers versus, the TMGL all the way in for Magog. These are your numbers, and let's try to work on these numbers, and let's work with the conservation district to help tell the story of this work around the data. And that has been really nice. And really why I wanted to tell you that story is really to link back to what Michelle was talking about around our deep relationships with these farms through these projects, and not just farms, just landowners in general. And then how that translates to our community engagement work and the work that we do with NRCS around locally led. So we're hosting local meetings, pulling out those priorities that Michelle had shared with you, Ben, these 3 priorities. Orleans County, our 3 priorities are very similar. Switch out PFAS for Casella, right? So that's really what came up for Orleans County as well. And why those meetings are successful is because we're the local entity that have ongoing deep relationships with these folks. And so those folks are coming to our meetings because it isn't Montpelier or others that are hosting those meetings. It's me, I'm their neighbor, I know them. And so we get a lot of really good connections. We get a lot of folks coming, and we get a lot of really good outcomes. And one of the biggest outcomes of that locally led piece is to provide NRCS with a request for funding to create a local fund pool, which creates NRCS dollars that are just for our local conservation districts. And so in Orleans County, for the last 3 years, we've pulled down $700,000 to address invasive species as a priority, because that's what our partners and that's what the community was really conveying to us for us to put that forward. And so we've obligated $700,000 that wasn't competed against statewide. It was just for Orleans County. And in the slide that Michelle shared around, the reductions in USDA dollars, the last round, just this past round after the IRA money went away, 50% of the allocations in Orleans went to that local fund pool. So it really just highlights the importance of the work that we do, maintaining these deep relationships, which really can't be funded just through grants. Doing that locally led work, and then really trying to pull down those federal dollars. And what we get for that money, or for that process, is we get a tiny grant from NRCS to do that locally led work. And this is the first year we've actually ever gotten a grant to do that work. And it's a federal mandate for all conservation districts around the country to do that, but it's an unfunded federal mandate. And I really just wanted to share with you that your support could help us deliver that federal mandate more fully, more consistently, more meaningfully, because we can't do that work for a $5,000 grant once, really. We need to have continual engagement. And that was one of the things that really came out of our meetings, was like, we want to, landowners want to know more. Interested folks in our community want to know more. Like, what is NRCS doing? What are you doing? What are your partners doing? And so we hope to continue to host those meetings, provide updates to the community. But really, with your support around our base funding, we really could deliver that in a way that would provide more meaning and continue to pull down those federal dollars. So I'm happy to share with you more about the NRCS directives. There is a nice, 3-page document that shares exactly what that is.
At some point in
anyone's
time,
interested.
can you tell us about where you are with funding as far as within this building, as far as where you're at? Because I think that
Yeah.
we'd like to know that. We'd like to know where
Yeah.
you are with the dollar.
So we have 612,000 in base funding in the House Appropriations Bill. The Agency of Ag cut that back to 500,000.
Right.
House Approps restored it to 612. House Environment supported 1.25 in base funding for the districts, and House Agriculture supported 3 million. We know that there has been some interest in the Senate Natural Resources in the 3 million number. We're really looking to increase the base funding. 3
The
million.
base funding right now is 612.
612, 3 million would have us over the moon. That would let us do a lot of great work. Particularly around those priorities that communities identify, but that we don't have funding streams to support. But, we'll be happy with anything above 612 will make us all very happy. We know this is a really tight year. A full person in every
Right,
district
613.
would be a dream, but we know it's a hard year. So we recognize that, and we'll be grateful for anything that we can do, and we'll put it to good use. We'll do good work with it, whatever you give us.
I definitely appreciate saying, here's the minimum we need, because that's really what we need to hear. What's the minimum? Because we'll shoot for more for you, I'm sure, but appropriations probably cut that down pretty quick. But that's what and all your funding comes either from state or federal dollars, right? There's no private.
There is, some districts have been successful at raising a small amounts of federal money. Bennington is actually the best at that.
Private money or?
Private money, yeah, of raising private money. But right now,
And
you're funded, I think 40% federal, 60% state, I think is kind of the average for the districts, but it's mostly grant dollars.
And when you have donators, is that is that a tax reduction for them? Is you're a nonprofit?
Yeah, the districts are actually municipalities
Okay.
under state law, but the VACD is a nonprofit. It's a creation of the districts, but the districts themselves are municipal entities, but you can get a tax rebate for that, but it's a little complicated for the private donors, but some of them are just like, we just want to be a part of this and we don't care. That's been some of the experience that Bennington's had, but it's the same as if you donate to your local town recreation program. That's a tax deduction for you. It would be the same for donating to the district. It gets a little trickier for businesses than for individuals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tough time to take over for Jill, huh?
Yes.
Um,
They didn't warn me about this.
yeah,
I negotiated for a higher salary.
I've been a long time fan of CD, so, thank you for everything you do. I'm just wondering if there's any way, if it stays at 612, that you could take a look at specific projects and find a little less expensive things to do in order to keep people employed, first of all. So much of what I'm hoping for is that the staffing can remain constant and we're not having people lose their jobs over it. And in a way, if you could find, I don't want to say something less to do, but something less expensive to do, the culvert project, for instance, if you didn't buy the culvert, but you could still have the employees do other things with landowners. And then the other question I have, I guess, is there any way to share, like Foley Meadowy was brought up once or twice. Some of the CDs are doing pretty well, I think, individually. Essex and Orleans, and maybe you just pick those projects to show us, but is there any way to sort of share the pool of available resources, or does each of them operate completely independently?
They operate independently. We do have some grants that come into VACD and go out to all of the districts, or come into the Natural Resources Council and go out to all of the districts. But a lot of the money, like the culvert money, is project specific.
Mhm.
So they applied for funding to upgrade these 3 culverts.
And for a culvert project, it's actually 4 different funding streams generally. So you're like
Uh,
conglomeration of all of the available fundings, and our job is to get all of
Yeah.
that together and work with the town and line it all up, so, yeah.
What are the so where would that be your responsibility? Is it culverts into a waterway, it's into a field type situation to where it's controlling the flow of water?
So
So it's
for,
on private land or what have you,
right,
and the
so
water.
for us,
Yeah.
yeah, our mission is around soil and water quality. So like for the culvert that was referenced here in Orleans County, we did a study with Fish and Wildlife in the upper Missisquoi to look at streams above 500-foot elevation and look at where are those constriction points for fish to move upstream, as well as the culverts that are misaligned and causing erosion, and that can we work with the town to prioritize those? And so that's how we eventually got to the culvert that was referenced here.
Sure.
So usually we're trying to thread the needle on fisheries, water quality, town priorities, transportation priorities, so that we can maximize the amount of funding that's available and kind of hit all the marks where, you know, the community's interest is.
And in our
Yeah.
small towns especially, a lot of the road crew might be real, they're not, they don't have the same necessarily level of expertise as these guys do when they're looking at a culvert. They may know what the state rules are, hopefully, but they're, road foreman may not have, who's got a team of himself and one other guy, and they mostly do plowing and grading and that kind of work. They don't necessarily have that expertise that these guys do to be able to look and say, what's the ideal size of that culvert to reduce erosion, to restore fish passage and wildlife passage? What do we need here? And to be able to coordinate and do all of the grant filing and all of the reporting that's required to be able to draw down those funds. It's really people like Sarah that have that expertise, especially in areas where you're talking about small towns. South Burlington, they can hire, they can hire engineers to be their public works directors with years of experience, but our small towns don't have that option. So the districts have been really filling kind of that gap. And it's important work because it's flood reduction work, as we all saw with those culverts that have washed away in the last 2 summers.
Yeah, so we do that work with towns, but as well, as you mentioned, on private property. So we just secured money through the Clean Water Service Provider to do designs on 3 culverts in the watershed on private lands, farmlands, where the culvert is undersized and causing erosion and reducing fish passage. And so we'll be working with design firms, engineers to look at, the hydraulics of that watershed and what size pipe needs to go in there and how much is that going to cost. And then from there, we'd apply for another grant to do the implementation of the project and all of that stuff. Yeah.
So it's more complicated than I thought.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you have to,
I'm sure.
if you hired the engineer, a hydrologist, and that come down and decide what size culvert you need, how do they get paid?
Through the grant.
Okay.
Right. That's
So you
what
really
the
need
grant
to, so
is.
you really
Yeah.
need to make sure you have the grant okay before you ever even start.
Oh, yeah.
There's no
And
cooperation.
to even get to that point, we have to apply to grant to do project development. So there's a project development, project design, project implementation, and they separate all of those out, which creates a lot of administrative work to get all of that.
So there's no cooperation in between the states, between Fish and Wildlife, DEC, or anything like that, where they've already got paid people on staff to help come in and help mitigate some of that cost?
We definitely work with them very closely, but they generally don't have the capacity to pull down the grant funds to do the implementation. So we work.
I'm
with
just
them.
thinking some of the, not so much as the grant funds and all that, but some of this, the
The work.
Design.
no, just the cost of hiring an engineer, where they have somebody on staff paying, so none of that cooperation can happen amongst interagency stuff.
Not to hire an engineer.
Let me in.
I think the state is also everybody's kind of desperate for engineers. So I think the state engineers are as maxed out as some of that was one of the problems in recovery from the flooding, is that we talked to towns that they couldn't get the engineers to design the stuff they needed to rebuild. That was a common refrain we heard over and over and over again, because we just had a shortage of engineers. Hardwick was so desperate, they decided to hire their own engineer, but they couldn't find anyone they could afford. So
Right, and I think those engineers might be in the transportation department, and so then you have to really box yourself into state highways, Route 5, Route 14. But they already have their priorities, and oftentimes, well, we work with them and we try to thread the needle on you know, is the culvert that we prioritize for fish passes and water quality line up with your priorities? And they already have their priorities, and in a perfect world, sometimes those line up and we can work together. But that hasn't happened yet in my experience in Lyons County so far.
And we tried to hire an engineer and to do some of this work for the districts, and it didn't. We had funding to do it from agency of ag, but we hired an engineer.
Well, Joe.
Go
you
ahead,
gotta
I'm
let the
sorry.
School me an engineer.
So you're entering my realm that I usually work in as far as excavation and that, and we had a washout in Starkborough. It was on a private road. The FEMA ended up doing, and they wanted to replace the culvert and ended up becoming a box culvert, then ended up becoming a bridge. Although originally when I went and priced it, I can say, okay, you need the culvert. I'm going to get it from XYZ company. XYZ company sometimes will say, well, would you like us to send somebody out to do a site survey and say, hey, this is the site culvert use. As long as you're going to buy it through them, it's included. And usually I had 3 different, and they all were willing to send out an engineer. Once, have you ever used that resource of saying, hey, here's a project?
We haven't. Usually we're on perennial streams, and we usually need to get the river scientists to sign off on it and how big it needs to be. What the engineer has done is making sure that it meets that bank full. And I don't know what the engineers through the private industry
They're also the engineers.
do, if they're all meeting state regulations in terms of, 1.5 times what the bank full. And so that's what the engineers in my experience have done. So, and then, properly aligning it with the stream channel and all of those things. But no, short answer, I have not worked with the private industry. Yeah.
I think the grants also give us a little less flexibility because we have to do here's the design grant. And we have to, then you're paying to hire the engineer to do some of the analysis, and then you get the implementation grant. And so there's usually you have to do a competitive process for that engineer because you're using public money. There has to be, an open competitive process.
So how many projects do you are and never get to finish because it runs out of funding because you said you got to get a grant to start the project development, then a grant for the engineering. Do you ever get to the point where you pay the engineer and then the project never happens?
No. So when we move into design phase, we secure a letter of commitment from the landowner to say, we're gonna see this through, because we don't want to invest our time and, public monies into something that is not gonna happen. So we do request a letter of commitment, and most of our grants require a letter of commitment from the landowner in order to get funded.
And does the landowner contribute?
Some cases they do provide match, but some cases they don't. Yeah.
Well, cool. What else?
That's all.
Just give us 300, we'll be.
Yeah.
Over the moon, I think it's.
Over the moon, right? I think that's another, you've heard that.
It would be, we would be over the moon.
Well, I'm very happy that you're back to 612. I think that you are very accurate when you say that it's a tough year.
Yeah. And there's so much uncertainty everywhere.
There is.
Yeah, every sector is being impacted, so we know and understand that. Absolutely.
Yep.
I'm sure if we can scratch a little more for you, we will.
Yeah,
We could try
I
that.
appreciate the honesty.
Yeah.
That would be most of the time it's like, we've got to have this or else we're doing it. Yeah, it's not. Sky isn't falling.
Well, and it'll be interesting to
You
see
guys
what
have done it
happens
for
next
us,
year,
so.
because right now, I know for my, district, we're often on an 18-month cycle. You ask me right now how my funding looks, and we look good right now. But next year when we're here talking to you, we might have a little bit more of a doomsday scenario depending on how things go. So, yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that I have done since I've been in this building is there is a right way to ask for money. And sometimes it doesn't get to that point. We are a 2-year committee. With what you have enlightened us with today, it could very well impact what happens next year as well. We're aware, we will do with what we can do.
I did have one other question.
Yes.
So the conservation districts are municipalities, so school districts are municipalities, towns are municipalities, but you guys can't tax anybody.
No, we have no taxing authority.
Yeah.
We have no authority to raise money on our own. It's a very odd thing that can't, I mean, the statute was passed in Vermont in 1939 as it was all part of the response to the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
So they created the Soil Conservation Service, and then they created the conservation districts to be a local partner. So we also have a sort of a preferred relationship with NRCS, like we have a special relationship with them. So one of the things they do subsidize the work because they give us office space, they give us, in some cases, they give our staffs computers. So we have the federal government subsidizes a little bit in ways that are kind of invisible.
Yeah.
But we're happy to answer any questions, and we're definitely going to be reaching out to you all once the session ends and inviting you out to see some of the projects if you're interested. We'd love to have you come and see what's happening with your local district. I know Rob had a great experience
Oh,
in Bennington.
And it was just a field where I got a tick bite, but. know.
Always.
But no, Michael said they were gonna start something this summer, so yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing
Yeah.
that. And I can just look out my window, because that's where I work.
So you can see it, but please don't tell people about the tick bite. We don't want to discourage folks from coming.
Oh, everyone needs to know that wherever you go, there's gonna be ticks now. It's just how it is. It's challenging.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank
We
you.
really
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
your
Yes.
time.
I'll catch up with you later.
So-
Okay, that sounds great.
Great.
Okay.
I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Yep.
And if you have any further questions, please just let us know.
Yep. Okay, committee, we're gonna, have some, tomorrow we're gonna have, talk about that pesticide situation, go a little more about that. And then we'll have Mike Grady come in and talk about 118. And then we're gonna try to leave Friday open to see what we can button up and what we can do. Probably a lot of it we spent on 118. And then, so yeah, I'd like to, like I said, I'd like to try to get as much done as we can this week and early next week and get it wrapped up. And be, ready for what's gonna come over on the House. I think, Senator Major and I are kind of talking about a few different things here. I mean, the resiliency bill is just getting all kind of mucked up a little bit over there. The right farm bill, which he really has just done a pass by, is getting mucked up over there. So, we'll wait for those things to come back over and get our fingerprints back onto them. I think both of those bills are, I'm sorry.
Which committee has S60?
It's going back, it'll come out of,
Yeah, the situation is they're trying to attach, forestry onto it.
Oh, right.
so we want to keep it kind of,
Yeah.
kind of it on the
Yeah.
ag part of it.
Because when you do that, it limits the number of farmers that'll be able to.
On the ag side, on the house side, they do have forestries.
Yes.
They do,
And
right,
that's
yeah,
been committee.
Well, we lose control of that bill that comes back over with that.
Good on all.
Yeah. So we wanna try to look at that, and that wasn't really what the spirit of the bill was. And they can do with whatever they wanna do, but we can also do whatever we wanna do when we get back over here, so. So it is a Senate bill. I think we have broad support within the Senate on both those bills, so. We'll try to keep them on the right path. But other than that, I think we're gonna call it a morning. Unless anybody has anything else to do and say, or